Today we're going to talk about tripods and specifically whether you should center column or not with your landscape photography. So one of the key pieces of gear for landscape photography are tripods. And as you first start looking at tripods, there's different things to consider: carbon fiber versus aluminum, tripod height, and how well does it pack up and travel? Does it collapse down to be small? Is that important to you or not? One of the things to think about is a center column. And at first glance, a center column looks very convenient and a great way to go. But in landscape photography, there's a couple considerations to keep in mind, and that's what we're going to dive into today. First, we'll take a look at some of the pros of center columns, and then we'll take a look at some of the inconveniences of center columns in landscape photography. And at the end of the video, you can decide which is best for you and your photography. So let's jump in there. So what is a center column on a tripod? Well, a center column on a tripod, we'll take a look at this Faisal tripod over here. As you can see, it has this column that comes down the center. So I've got my normal 3 legs, and I've got this column, and that's the center column. And what you can do is you can loosen this up here, and you can raise the center column up like this. So when we're talking about center columns and tripods, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about this center column allows you to go up and down with your tripod, make those adjustments to height. Whereas over here on this tripod, there is no center column. The highest I can go is the furthest I can put my legs out on the tripod. So this tripod has no center column. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about center columns and tripods. So let's take a look at why a center column might be attractive. So first, the biggest reason why a tripod center column can be handy is the quick and ease of adjustments and height it can give you. So take a look at this. If I've taken all the time to get this tripod all set up, you know, as landscape photographers, we're frequently setting up on uneven surfaces, so it can take a little bit to get a nice stable platform setting. And then I sit here and I'm like, you know, I wish I had another 4 inches of height to get this picture. With this, all I have to do is loosen this up, raise this up about 4 inches. Boom, I changed my composition super fast, super easy. I didn't have to try to lengthen legs and readjust and restabilize the tripod. So it makes it quick and easy to make those height adjustments. And let's take a look at this tripod without a center column. If I want to get a little bit of additional height or raise or lower the camera, I have to adjust the position on all 3 legs and restabilize my tripod. And that can take a little bit of time, and it's certainly not quite as quick as just loosening up center column, raising it a little bit and tightening it back down. So that's one of the first real benefits of a center column, is it allows you those quick and easy micro adjustments in height once you're all set up. So another advantage the center column brings to a tripod is it allows you to get a little bit of extra height with a minimal penalty of weight. So for example, with this tripod, it actually goes up very tall. As you can see, nearly up and out of frame up there. And it does that by only increasing the weight of a center column. Whereas if I wanted this to be this tall with the legs, 3 legs would have to be longer, which are going to increase weight and potentially also increase size of the tripod for portability. So a center column is a quick and easy way to get more height out of a tripod with a reduced cost of weight as compared to extending the 3 legs of a tripod without a center column. Because in this case, without a center column, if I wanted this tripod to be taller and remain without a center column, all 3 legs have to get longer in order to get that extra height out of it. And that comes with a weight increase as well as a size increase. And a third advantage a lot of center column tripods bring is because of how they can collapse up, you can keep that tripod for packing and for travel much smaller. So for example, in this tripod, if I raise the center column a little bit and then collapse my legs, so I got the center column raised, I collapsed my legs, these will flip up and reverse on themselves. And that allows this tripod, which is my tallest tripod I own, to actually collapse down into a fairly small size. So when you want a tripod with height, but you also want to be transportable, a center column tripod may be for you, because a lot of them have this feature where you can raise the center column, flip your legs in reverse, and get down to a pretty transportable length of a tripod and still have a lot of height. Like I said, this is my tallest tripod I own, and it still collapses down fairly small. So it's easy to see why those 3 qualities make a center column tripod attractive. However, for a landscape photographer, there's some other considerations we need to keep in mind, and that being our environmental conditions. We're often outdoors on uneven surfaces. We have wind to contend with. We have weather to contend with. When you start to consider those, we need to look at some of the cons of center column tripods so that you can consider that when you're trying to decide whether to have a tripod with a center column or not. So the first thing to consider just in overall build of center column tripods is the locking mechanism where it clamps in on whether the column goes up or down. That in and of itself introduces some instability of a tripod. For example, over here, there is no mechanism, so there's no spot of mechanical pieces that have any wiggle or anything like that. Over here on these two tripods that have center columns, there's these mechanisms that, you know, they tighten up and they clamp the column up or down. That mechanism itself can introduce wobble and instability to the tripod. So since these mechanisms can introduce wiggle, when you're trying to select a tripod, if you're opting for a center column tripod, make sure this piece, this mechanical piece that clamps in, keeps the center column stable even when it's raised. Like I said, this cheaper tripod, it wiggles. And right out of the gate, I'm introducing potential for instability when my camera's on top of it in conditions where there might be wind or anything like that. Over here on my Faisal tripod, a much more expensive tripod, when it's clamped down, it's pretty stable. I'm sure if you took some sort of advanced measuring device, you could find some wiggle in it, but I think for landscape photography, it's negligible how much it's introducing to the package. So keep that in mind as you're picking out tripods. Some of them will have more wiggle than others. It's probably based on the quality of the build of the tripod. So you spend a little more on the tripod and you're apt to be able to work around that problem. But seriously, go to your camera store, raise them and check them, because if you're trying to be on a budget, this can introduce that wiggle that you're trying to avoid. So just be careful of that. So the second thing I think a center column consideration to be aware of is how it impacts your ability to get down low for perspective. I like to get my camera down low, and you've probably seen it in some of my videos where I get the camera down really low by opening the tripod legs and spreading them out to get there. Now the center column, let's take a look at this one. We'll collapse the legs up. So here we are, we put the legs down all the way. If I want to go low, open out my legs like this, and look, the center column still comes down low. I cannot get lower than that. In fact, now I have to put the legs down so that this doesn't hit the ground. That's going to be a problem with a lot of center column tripods, is their ability to get low. With that said, several of them do make it so you can flip the center column and invert it and then hang your camera down and get low. That does orient your camera in an upside down position, which technically doesn't impact it. I mean, you always flip the image in Photoshop or something like that. So, you know, that's not impossible, but at least as far as the way my head thinks, it's cumbersome to do. So it's not impossible, but to me, it's not efficient. And for someone like me that likes to photograph low compositions frequently, I prefer a tripod without a center column, because for example, this tripod, I can take the legs, fold them all the way out, and allows me to get super low without having to contend with a center column or anything like that. Okay, so I moved my camera over from this tripod with no center column to this one just to sort of help demonstrate this point. This third point is the one I think is the hardest to work around, because it actually deals with the physics of where the load is on the tripod. So when your camera's on the tripod, down low, the center column is not extended, it's close to the apex of the tripod. You've got the three legs coming up and you're maintaining a fair amount of your stability. If you've got a good locking mechanism, you're not introducing too much instability even in a windy condition. But say I start to bring it up for that extra height. So I am moving the load of this tripod up higher. I am moving it above this apex on the tripod. What does that mean? That means when a force hits this camera, it's introducing more torque down here and introducing instability that isn't otherwise there, because I've changed the physics of the tripod. Now I have my weight up high, and this is having to counter that high weight. When it's down here, it's pretty much like a tripod without a center column. It's down low. I'm not introducing much force on it when something hits this camera. And when I say something, think wind. When you're out photographing a seashore or out in the mountains on a ridge and the wind's coming along, your camera is getting hit by that wind. So that's introducing that force and that torque. Bring the center column up like that, and I introduce more torque. So there's a couple things. One, it's more apt to be pushed because it's putting this pressure down here and it's not as stable in the wind. Two, and there's been some studies that show this, when it's up here, once the camera starts shaking, it's hard, the vibration through the center column persists longer the higher up it is, because the weight's up here, and it's like think a tall building when it sways in the wind. Up top, it's like this, until it stops shaking so much. What can introduce that shake? A gust of wind could do it. Just me pressing the shutter button can do it. So you can work around a little bit of that with a self timer to help get that shutter away. On a DSLR with the mirrors flipping, that could introduce it. So the column extended is allowing vibrations to persist for a longer period of time. So to me, that's the hardest con to work around with a center column, is how it actually changes the physics of how your tripod works as you start to extend the tripod. In some conditions, light winds, things like that, you can get away with it. It won't be a problem. But if you're on ridges or where there's a lot of wind or anything like that, or if you're not using a self timer or you're not locking your mirror up, some of that vibration will persist. So that's one of the things to me where one of the cons to the center column is very well worth considering, especially for the type of photography where we're not in a studio with those controlled conditions. We're out in the field with unpredictable conditions. So what does this all mean? Well, really, I just wanted to make sure you had what you needed to know about center columns to make a good decision about whether you purchase a tripod with the center column or without. At the end of the day, it's sort of a subjective preference to which you prefer, because there's always pros and cons and trade-offs. Even for the cons, I've listed out some of the ways to work around them. You know, for the locking mechanism, just make sure you're getting a quality tripod with a good locking mechanism. I had 2 tripods here today. One is terrible with that locking mechanism. The other one is good. You can diminish that con by making sure you get a quality tripod. 2, the ability to get down low. As I showed, in many cases you can flip that center column to get low. It just takes extra work. It's not quite as efficient in my opinion. But if you don't do a lot of low compositions, it's not going to be as big of a con for you as it might be for me. And finally, and this is the harder one to work around, is just as you start, because you can't change physics, as the camera starts to go up on the center column, you're changing how force impacts the stability of the tripod. You know, the workarounds for it are, if it's windy, don't raise your center column, and you're just going to want to keep it down low to minimize any kind of impact. If you're on a still day, like a still morning like this, well, you're probably good to go. And if you like center columns, you're all set. Those are things to consider as you choose. As far as my preference for tripods with a center column or without, I tend towards, when I'm doing landscape photography, for tripods without a center column. And most of that's predicated on that second feature, which is I like to shoot low compositions frequently enough that I don't want to mess with pulling a center column out, flipping it upside down, and shooting with an inverted camera. With no center column, I can just pop the legs out, get down nice and low real quick, and it works out really well for me. That's the biggest reason I tend towards this. I do have some stability concerns just because I'm outdoors photographing the wind often enough that I don't feel like I'd be able to raise that center column confidently often enough that it warrants having it on the tripod. I'd prefer the slightly smaller package with the no center column and the lightweight for when I go out in the field. Either way, regardless of your choice, I hope you now have enough information to know what the pros of a center column are and how it could benefit your landscape photography, as well as what the cons of a center column are and why it might impact your landscape photography. Now that you know the pros and cons, you can decide which factors are important to you and make the right choice for your next tripod. If you enjoyed today's video, please hit that like button. And if you want to see future landscape photography content from me, including mini gear reviews, behind the scenes, talks like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any landscape photography content from me in the future. And thank you for watching.